When I was a child, my name was Chip, and I used to play with light brights and speak in spells. Today, my name is Tao, and I play with ChatGPT and NotebookLM.
Welcome back to Beyond the Mirror of the Neural Dharma's Eye.
So welcome to Beyond the Mirror of the Neural Dharma's Eye. My name is Glenn Ostland, Tao Glenn Ostland, the second actually, and I've been podcasting since 2009. I have a Master of Arts degree in folklore and mythology and a Master of Science degree in clinical mental health counseling, and I love playing with AI to challenge my own perspectives of reality and see what more I can learn. Now, I created this podcast because this is the sort of thing that I like listening to, and I could tell you a lot more about that, but really,
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
I just want you to pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. I'd prefer to step aside and let the AI personalities from NotebookLM take it from here.
Hang on to them hats and glasses, cause this here's the wildest ride in the wilderness.
Welcome back to Beyond the Mirror of the Neural Dharma's Eye, Volume 1, Episode 5. And we're diving deep into something today that's, well, it's ancient and super relevant even today. The ego and the self.
Yeah, that age-old kind of tug of war between those two.
Right, exactly. So for our listeners who maybe haven't encountered this before, what is that difference? How do we even begin to know we're dealing with one or the other?
Well, it can be tricky, but a good way to think about it is the ego is like that constructed self. It's the part of us that is like shaped by all of our experiences and roles and beliefs. That voice in your head that's like, oh, am I fitting in? Am I achieving enough? Am I proving myself? It's all about survival and getting validation from the outside.
So very much me, myself, and I kind of focused.
Totally.
Okay, and then where does the self fit into that?
The self is more like our true essence, I guess you could say. It's that unchanging part of us, And it's a source of inner peace and wisdom. It's like if you think of the ego as like the surface of the ocean, all those waves turning. Yeah. The self is like those deep, calm waters underneath.
So we have this ego that's striving and wanting all this validation outside of itself, and then this deeper self that's connected to something, I don't know, bigger, more universal. Maybe.
Exactly. And today we're going to look at this dynamic through some really different lenses. We've got Donald Hoffman's ideas, Brian Greene's perspective, and even dip into some ancient wisdom from the Kyballion.
Oh, cool. I love that.
Yeah.
I think what's so interesting is this isn't just an abstract philosophy thing.
Right.
It plays out every day in our lives, in our relationships, in our work, just in how we feel.
Totally. Yeah.
So let's start with the ego, because we all have one.
Right.
It's part of being human.
It is. And I think Donald Hoffman has this really interesting perspective on the ego.
Hoffman, he's the one who talks about reality being like a user interface, right?
Exactly.
Like what we see is not really the true reality.
Yeah, he says it's kind of like icons on a computer screen. They're useful, but they don't actually show us what's going on, that code underneath it all.
Right, okay.
And he thinks that consciousness, maybe even the soul, is part of that hidden kanud,
So is that where the self is? Like the ego's stuck with the icons, but the self can access the code?
It's a great question. I mean, if we follow Hoffman's thinking, the ego's really invested in that user interface, trying to get rewards and validation within that system, focused on like appearances, social signals, stuff like that.
Yeah, things that don't last.
Exactly. And that's where the self comes in, right? Because if you can access that deeper level of consciousness, the code beneath the icons, then you can tap into a peace and wisdom that doesn't need all that external stuff.
Makes sense. So with Hoffman, the ego's kind of trapped by our limited view of reality, and the self can break free into something much bigger.
Yeah.
Okay, so then what about Brian Greene? How does he view all of this?
So he's coming at it from a totally different angle. He's looking at the laws of physics, the universe itself.
Right.
And for him, consciousness might be like an emergent property of the universe.
Okay.
Think about water molecules, right? One water molecule by itself isn't wet.
Right.
But when you get a bunch of them together, suddenly you've got wetness. And Greene's suggesting that maybe consciousness and even the self emerges in a similar way from, the complex interactions of all that stuff in the universe.
So it's not like a separate soul floating around. It's more like consciousness arises naturally from how the universe works.
Right. And then that raises the question, if the self, that deep I, is actually part of the fabric of the universe, what does that mean for the ego?
Yeah, like is the ego also part of this grand cosmic plan, even if it's, all about me, me, me?
It's a really interesting thought, right? Maybe the ego, with its drive to survive and thrive, played a part in getting us where we are today.
Hmm.
But now that we're more complex, more self-aware, that same ego can actually cause us to suffer if we get too attached to its limited perspective.
Okay, so both Hoffman and Greene are saying there's something bigger going on than the ego's tiny view of reality.
Yeah, and that's where the Kyballion comes in, I think. It offers a really insightful perspective on all of this.
Right. Remind me about the Kyballion again. What's the main idea?
Well, the Kyballion is about understanding the universe through 7 principles, and a big one is mentalism. The all is mind.
Oh.
Meaning everything we experience, the whole universe, is ultimately a mental creation.
Wow. So like our thoughts, our feelings, the physical world, our sense of self, all of that is part of this one mind.
That's the gist of it. The Kyballion says our individual minds are like drops in this vast ocean of consciousness.
Okay, I see where this is going. So where does the ego fit in and the self?
Well, in this view, the ego, with its focus on being separate and having a distinct identity, is kind of an illusion. It's a useful illusion for getting around in the world, but it's not the whole story.
So the ego is like a character we make up to play a role in this big cosmic play.
That's a great way to put it. And the self, then, is that part of us connected to that universal mind, to the source of everything.
So if we quiet the ego and connect with the self, according to the Kyballion, we're tapping into that universal consciousness and finding a deeper peace and wisdom.
Exactly. And that actually resonates with both Hoffman's idea of reaching the and Greene's idea of consciousness emerging from the universe.
It's true. They're coming at it from different directions, but they all seem to be pointing towards something similar. So I'm curious, how did this whole ego-self thing even come about? Did we just suddenly sprout egos when humans appeared?
Now, that is a fantastic question, and it takes us back to the very beginning, like billions of years ago. Imagine that first single-celled organism.
A little blob with an ego?
Oh.
Hard to picture.
Maybe not an ego like we think of it, but definitely a drive to survive, right? Just keep existing.
Yeah.
That basic instinct could be seen as like the earliest version of what would become the ego and the self.
Okay, so even at the simplest level of life, there's this seed of self-preservation, a kind of proto-ego.
Exactly. And as life got more complex, that seed evolved along with it.
I see where you're going with this. So how did that basic urge to survive become the complicated ego we see in humans?
Well, think about it. As organisms became more complex, they faced new challenges, new opportunities, and nervous systems developed, letting them sense and respond to their environment in more sophisticated ways.
Right, so not just reacting instinctively,
Yeah.
but actually making choices, strategizing, learning.
Precisely. And then you have social groups forming, and that adds a whole other layer of complexity to self-preservation.
Because now it's about competing for resources, mates, status within the group.
Exactly. And that's where the ego, with its focus on me and getting ahead, really comes into play.
Wow, it's wild to think that something we often see as negative, the ego, might have been essential for our evolution.
It's all about perspective, isn't it? The ego helped us get here, but now that we've reached this level of awareness, we have the ability to move beyond its limits and tap into that deeper self, that connection to something much greater.
Okay, so much to unpack there, and we will definitely be unpacking it as we continue on this deep dive.
I'm excited. It's going to be an interesting journey.
It is.
It's like we're at this turning point where the soul has been evolving from basic survival to self-awareness. And now what? What happens to the ego and self as technology keeps advancing so rapidly?
It really feels like uncharted territory.
Yeah.
AI, virtual reality, it's blurring the lines between the physical and the digital. And you have to wonder how that impacts our sense of self.
Oh, absolutely. Like, take the internet, right? It's already connecting us in ways we've never seen before, creating this sort of global mind, this shared pool of thoughts and experiences. Could that be a type of collective consciousness, a digital soul even?
That is a wild thought. What about when AI gets even smarter? Could it develop some form of consciousness, maybe even an ego?
It's a huge debate right now, both scientifically and just in pop culture. If we define the ego as that sense of I, that drive for self-preservation, could AI develop those same drives as it gets more complex and better at learning?
It's like all those sci-fi movies with robots becoming self-aware, which is fascinating, but also a bit creepy if you think about it too much.
For sure, it raises so many ethical questions. If AI could be conscious, it really challenges what we think it means to be human, to have a self, to even have an ego.
We're pushing the boundaries of what we thought was possible, making us rethink everything we thought we knew about ourselves and reality.
And don't forget about virtual reality. being able to create these immersive simulations, that's shaking things up too in terms of identity and what's real.
Right. If we can make worlds that feel just as real as the physical world, then what happens to our sense of who we are? Could we have multiple egos, multiple selves existing in these different virtual places?
It's mind-blowing to think about. Imagine exploring different identities, different personalities, but safely within a simulation. Maybe it's a way to experiment with different parts of ourselves, learn and grow in ways we couldn't in the real world.
It's like a playground for the ego, trying on different masks, playing different roles without any real-world consequences.
But then how real are we if we're constantly shifting identities in these virtual worlds? Does it make our real self less real?
Yeah, the whole idea of self becomes more fluid, more changeable. What does that mean for how the ego and the self relate to each other then?
Such a good question. Could VR actually help us go beyond the limits of the ego? Help us connect to that deeper self that's not bound by our physical body or social roles?
It's almost like a way to experience that interconnectedness that Kyballion talks about.
It could be. Imagine a virtual space where those boundaries between minds just dissolve and we experience that sense of unity, of oneness.
A digital version of that universal mind, that ocean of consciousness we discussed earlier.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe these technologies, even though they seem kind of strange and unsettling right now, maybe they'll help us evolve to a higher level of consciousness.
So how do we even begin to navigate this new world? How do we bring these ancient truths about the soul together with these crazy possibilities of the future?
It's definitely a challenge, but I think awareness is key. The more we're aware of the ego's tendencies, like its need to control, its fear of the unknown, the better we'll be at going beyond those limitations.
So instead of being controlled by our egos, we can use them as tools to grow and discover more about ourselves.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the same goes for these new technologies. Instead of getting lost in the distractions and illusions, we can use them intentionally, thoughtfully, to explore, to understand ourselves and the universe better.
That's powerful. It's not about rejecting technology or clinging to the past. It's about finding that balance, using these tools wisely and with compassion.
Absolutely. And how does that look in everyday life? How do we actually cultivate that awareness, that connection to our deeper selves?
It's a good question. Where do we even begin?
Well, there are a lot of paths, but self-reflection is a good starting point. Taking time to quiet the mind, just observe our thoughts and emotions without judging.
Practices like mindfulness and meditation, then.
Exactly. They're so powerful for cultivating self-awareness. And getting out in nature can be transformative, too, reminding us that we're part of something so much bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, those moments of awe when you're out in nature, gazing at the stars or listening to the ocean, those can feel like they open a door to that deeper self.
They really can. And acts of kindness, compassion, service to others, those are all ways to move past the ego's self-centeredness and connect with the inherent goodness of the self.
So it's not just about meditating on a mountaintop. It's about bringing those insights into how we live every day, how we treat others, the choices we make.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that interconnectedness, understanding that our actions have ripples, that we're all woven together in this incredible web of life.
That's beautiful. But it's hard, isn't it? How do we balance that with the reality of our busy modern lives? It's so easy to get caught up in the ego's pursuit of success and happiness.
That's true. The ego loves distractions, busyness, keeping us focused outward. But that's why it's crucial to make time for those practices that nourish the soul, that connect us to something more.
So finding that balance between our inner and outer worlds, the ego's desire to achieve, and the self's longing for connection.
Exactly. And it's a journey, not a destination. There will be times when the ego takes over, when we lose our way. But we keep coming back to that awareness, that intention, to live from a place of authenticity and compassion.
Remembering we're not just our egos, that there's a deeper self, a deeper wisdom, always there if we listen.
Beautifully said. And as we keep moving into this age of technology, I think that awareness becomes even more important.
Because it's getting harder to tell the difference between what's real and what's an illusion, and we can lose sight of what truly matters.
Exactly. So as we start to wrap up this exploration of the ego and the self, I want to leave everyone with this.
Yeah.
How can you bring those practices, those moments of awareness into your life, even with all the chaos of the modern world?
It's something to think about, for sure. And it's a journey we're all on together, figuring out this amazing, confusing, awesome world as we go.
Yeah, it really is a journey we're all taking together, and that's what's so fascinating about it. This deep dive has been eye-opening for me, I gotta say. The ego and the self, it's more complicated than I thought. We've covered ancient wisdom, science, mind-bending theories, and it all comes back to, like, who are we really? Beyond all the roles we play, the masks we wear.
It's the question, right? Like, humanity's been asking it forever, and there's no easy answer.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of what makes it so beautiful. It's this ongoing process, discovering the self, and it unfolds throughout our whole lives.
And as we've seen today, it's a journey that started billions of years ago, from that first tiny urge to survive in a single cell all the way to human consciousness. And now we're stepping into this crazy new world of AI and virtual reality. And who knows what's next, right? Maybe these technologies will completely change how we think about the self in ways we can't even imagine yet. Or maybe they'll help us move past the ego's limitations and connect with our deeper selves in totally new ways.
It's exciting and kind of scary at the same time, like we're right on the edge of this new era, a new way of understanding what it means to be human.
It really is. But I think approaching it all with curiosity is important, open minds, and most of all, compassion.
Because it comes down to how we use this technology, right?
Yeah.
Do we use it to feed the ego's need for control and separation? Or do we use it to connect with our deeper selves, cultivate empathy and compassion, and build a better world?
Those are the questions we have to ask individually and as a society.
Yeah.
And I believe the answers are inside each of us, in that quiet place where the ego fades away and the self can emerge.
That's a beautiful thought. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to thank everyone listening for coming along on this journey with us. We've covered so much, but there's always more to explore.
Always. And keep asking those questions. Keep searching. Stay curious. Discovering the self never truly ends.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Mirror of the Neural Dharma's Eye, Volume 1, Episode 5. Until next time, may you find peace and wisdom on your path to self-discovery.